Okay, this morning I want to go through a little exercise and topic that may be helpful to some others that I've previously done, and I thought might be useful for some people that have a Laguna IQ or anybody that has a CNC in helping them when they're getting ready to set up their Vectric projects or other projects where they need to locate hold downs and other elements for their project relative to their spoiler board, or it can be used when trying to set up the file for resurfacing your spoiler board, which I'll be doing in the near future. So, so I thought I'd go through the process that I did once before, but I just want to revalidate everything, and also thought it would be a useful video for some people. So I'm going to go ahead and do that at this time, and the process that I'm talking about is mapping my IQ desktop or my spoiler board pattern. So I'm going to map this this area using the software, which will be the most accurate way, and I'll do some second checks with a tape measure. Okay, now I'm in the home position. Essentially, this machine is the farthest to the left, looking at the bed, and to the front of the bed it can be. So that will be my initial map point. The first thing to point out is I'm using a V-bit with a nice sharp point, so that when I'm taking my readings of where I am on the bed, they'll be as close to accurate as I can possibly get them. As I go through this process, I'm going to write down the different measurements. So I'm going to be using a blue tape, either this one or this one. What I want to do next is to get as close as possible to the board, and over on this corner right here. Now that I have this position, I'm going to measure everything from this location. As a reminder, as I'm marking down these coordinates, it's coming directly from my handheld controller, which has got to be the most accurate, at least compared to what the CNC thinks it's doing. We're at a point where we've got the machine homed. I've taken the readings off of the corner. And the next step is to go step by step through the various pieces on this machine, including each of the bolt holes, each of the tracks, and I'm writing those measurements down. So instead of subjecting you to going through at normal pace and everything else, you're going to see just outtakes and cuts as I go through the process. Recognize that what I did was I started from this home position right here, and I worked my way through the whole bed until I had the whole bed mapped with blue tape, and I could tell where every bolt hole, every track was, and then I could go back to the computer and design this bed inside of vCarve Pro.
I'm
This part of the video will now focus on laying out our mapping data so that we have it available whenever we want it in the Vectric software. So we'll start with creating a new file. What we know if we call up our mapping data is from outside aluminum to outside aluminum track, it was 662 millimeters. So we're going to enter that data in. It's already there. We also know that the aluminum track was 920.7 millimeters in length. I'm going to go ahead and round that to 921. It's already in there. 0.25 inches thick is fine. Material surface is fine. We're not going to do anything with it. We're going to have the XY datum in the middle so that we can do symmetry. Hit OK, and we can start our project. We also know the aluminum tracks are 24 millimeters wide. The MDF part of the spoiler board is 135 millimeters wide, and we can use that information to start laying out the bed. First thing we want to do is create the layers that we want them in. So this layer we're going to call the border layer. We're going to add a new layer called tracks, and I'm going to make that blue, and we'll add another layer called MDF, and I'll make that green. Let's default to the border layer at first. So we're going to create a border around here for us doing alignment activity. Start with a rectangle, bottom left, come down here, snap into the bottom left, and we know it's 662 by 921. Hit apply, close. So we have our border. Next thing we want to do is create our tracks. So we'll do that at this time. I'm going to activate the tracks layer. I'm going to go to the rectangle tool, and I'm going to make a rectangle right in the corner there of 24 millimeters by 921. Hit apply. We started in the left corner, so we know that's aligned. Hit close. We can now flip horizontal about the job center and create a mirrored copy because we've got this item centered. So now we have our other track, and you can see we have the two blue tracks. Close. The next thing we want to do is lay out our tracks across here. We know that the tracks are 24 millimeters and the MDF is 135 millimeters, so we can perform an array using that information. So the first thing I want to do is select the aluminum track, go to copy array. I want 4 tracks. I want to offset it, and I know I want to offset it including the track and the MDF, so I want that to be 159, 135 for the MDF, along with 24 for the track. Offset, 4, that's columns. We know we need to offset this track by 159, which takes 24 for the track and 135 for the MDF. Hit copy, hit close. We also know that there were a couple extra millimeters in here if we measured from inside track to inside track. So let's see what we need to do with that. Let's validate. So this should be 135 millimeters. It is. This should be 135 millimeters. It is. This should be 135 millimeters. It is. And this should be slightly larger. And in this case, it's 137 millimeters. That's to be expected for spacing between each of those aluminum tracks. You may remember that in the video portion. To make sure everything is aligned, what we're going to do is we're going to take the inside, we're going to go to the alignment tool. We selected these inside tracks, and now we're going to select this track, and we're going to align across the job, not inside the last vector. Now, these will all be aligned across the material. Close. To validate that, let's take a look real quick. 135.5. There was 2 millimeters left over, so that would have been divided by 4, so it's 0.5 millimeters each, just to do a real another quick check. This should be 135.5. It is. That means that everything aligned the way we wanted them to. The next step then is to create the MDF pieces in between. We're going to activate that layer. We're going to take a rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and make that 135 by 921. Hit apply. So now we have the rectangle in the middle there. Now that we have our first MDF strip, each strip is identical as far as what the holes are going to be for the bolts. And so we want to make our first set of bolt holes in this MDF strip. To do that, we're going to go ahead and center the MDF strip. We know that the distance is 135.5 between each of these. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to move by clicking on it, hit the move, because we know the MDF is 135. We're going to move it over 0.25 inches. Apply. Now what we know is that the holes should be in the center. To make sure of that, we're going to put a quick guideline in the center. So that's the center. We'll take a quick measurement, 67.5 and 67.5 indicates that we're in the center. So we have a hole that's in the center of the MDF. And just to validate, if we bring in our picture, let's take a look at our picture, we can see that the X is in the 67.7 area. Best we could get by eyeball. So let's close that. So 67.75, 67.7, we're in a very close tolerance there. That's good. Now what we want to do is align in our horizontal areas. To align in our horizontal areas, let's have a little discussion about what we want to do. So let me bring up the picture of our mapping. As we look at this map, we can see that our first set of horizontal grid lines or horizontal holes here. If we look at this picture, we can see that the first horizontal set of bolts are measured at 100.2, which is as good as my eyeball could see when I was doing the mapping. I didn't change any of these at first because I wanted to write down exactly what I thought I was seeing or as close to it. I'm going to make that 100 because I know that each of these are equally dispersed, each of these bolt holes. So 100.2, I'm going to turn that into 100. I'm sure that it probably was 100. I was just 0.2 millimeters, which isn't very much off. The next line you see is 339.9. And if you go and do the math and look through all of these, you'll see that each location is 240 millimeters between each other. So if we do that, we'll see 100 plus 240 is 340. So 340 plus 240 is 580. 580 plus 240 is 820. So the grid lines we're actually going to use are going to be set a nice even number. So that's what we're going to do over the next few seconds, minutes, whatever it takes. Close this out. So we're going to start by placing a reference grid. This was the original grid line for the center of the MDF. So we start the horizontal grids by bringing our first grid line down at the front end of our bed. We right click on that grid line. We hit relative to that guide, and we said our first one was going to be 100, and we're going to create a new guide. The next one we said was going to be 340, so we create a new guide again, and this one was going to be 340. If we can't remember the numbers, remember that vCarve will do the math for us, so it's 580. We hit create new. This next one is 580 plus 240. We already know that's a pattern, equal, and we'll hit create new guide. Close. And now we have our horizontal grid lines at each of the locations on our MDF board. We're going to work on one MDF board at this time. The next thing we need to do is place the holes in the right location. So I'm going to draw a circle. I know that my initial set of bolt holes are 1/4 inch 20 bolts. 1/4 inch bolts in millimeters, I'm going to use 7 millimeters so that they're not as tight. I'm going to hit create, and I'm going to put that right centered on that grid line. Close, and now I have my first bolt. I'm going to take this bolt now and move it on its own layer. So I'm going to right click, close. Let me turn off the grid lines since they're getting in the way. Right click. I'm going to move this to a new layer called bolts. I'm going to color that layer red, and I'm going to make the new layer the active layer. Click on that bolt. I'm going to go use the array tool. We know that the bolt holes are 240. We can turn the guideline back on so we can validate. We know the bolt holes are 240 millimeters apart. So we want rows, not columns. So we'll make that 1. We want 4 rows total. We want to be 0 because we're not talking about columns, we're talking about rows. We want to be 240 millimeters apart, and we'll hit copy and validate there on the grid line. And they are. You can see the first one is on that grid, second one on that grid, third one on that grid, and there's no extra ones outside. So we've got our bolt holes in the right location at this time. Hit close for a second. I'm going to turn the grid lines back off. The next thing I want to do is I want to create another circle, and this one I want to be 19 millimeters, which is 3/4 countersink. I'm going to locate it in the center, close. The next thing we want to do is just like we did with the bolt holes, make it so I can see them. I always like to see where they're appearing. I want to create an array, and everything should already be set up. 4 rows, 240 offset, hit copy, and now you can see the countersinks around all the bolts. I'm going to create a new layer. I could have done this just before I created these, and I'm going to move these to a layer called countersink. What we've just created are the bolts and the countersinks around the bolts. Let me show you that on the map that we created before. I just called up the map. What you're looking at is the bolt down inside and then the countersink. So these are 1/4 bolts and 3/4 inch holes. We've created one board at this time. The next step in this process is to go ahead and duplicate this board, this MDF board, spoiler board, along with its bolt holes in the proper location across the full bed. So I have 1, 2, 3 more boards that I need to input into this bed. What I want to do temporarily is to group the board and all the holes together. So I've highlighted them, made sure everything's purple, right click, and group objects, or I could have just hit the G key and it would have grouped them. To place these boards and these tracks, I want to use the array tool. Let's think through how we're going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this board and we're going to move it so it's located in the center between each of these tracks. Let's take a measurement. We have 135.5 millimeters in space. Each track, let me close this. Each track, recall, is 24 millimeters. So when we do our array, we're going to want to take into account that. So our array is going to be moving in the X direction, 135.5 plus 24, and that should place each of these MDF sections in the center between the aluminum tracks. So let's click on the board and bolts, go to the array tool. So what we're going to do is we've selected this group, and now we're going to use the array tool. We've opened the array tool. Remember, we're going to go in the X direction, so that's columns. So we're going to hit 1 row, 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to give ourselves an offset, not in the Y direction, but in the 0 direction. And that offset, we can do the math here, is 135.5 plus 24 equal, and hit copy. So now each of those MDF pieces is located in the center between its aluminum tracks. Now that we have our MDF boards in place, and we also have our aluminum tracks in place, we've essentially got our board completely mapped. We can use this in future projects to determine where we can place objects on the bed and have proper hold down, or when we're trying to set up paths for us to flatten our spoiler board. I also use this information here, the individual MDF information, when I wanted to replace each of these boards. Unlike other spoiler boards on some machines that don't have aluminum tracks, these have to be put in one board at a time. So each board, you need to be able to measure and know how to set it up when you want to replace these boards. Having this in place allows you to do that quickly. What I do when I'm doing that process is I actually cut each of these MDF boards on my table saw. I then hold the boards down on my CNC and drill these holes. You can go ahead and ungroup the bolt holes, countersinks, and the boards so that they're all on their individual layers. All I did was select them all, hit the ungroup U, and everything's ungrouped and on their original layers. Save. You now have a vCarve file of your bed for whatever purposes you want to use it. But what I find most useful is not this file, but I export. Let's do that at this time. Highlight everything, and I like to export this file as one of two files. Either export it as an SVG, and so what I will say is my Laguna Bed map. I had a typo there. And I like to put in the date that I did this. So this is on 1-13-2022. Hit save, and now I have an SVG file whenever I need to bring it into another project. The other favorite thing I like to do is to export it as a DXF file. Laguna Bed map. 1-23-2022 being saved as a DXF file. Hit save. At this point in the video, we demonstrated how we physically mapped my Laguna IQ CNC bed. We then took that data and used it to create vectors inside of vCarve Pro and exported those vectors so that they could be used in other projects. Originally, I was planning on making a video that demonstrated actually how you use those exported vectors in other projects and including it as part of this video. But after shooting this video and going through the editing process, I realized it's much too long for one video. So in the future, I'll have 2 extra videos and show how I use the exported vectors that we just developed in other projects for hold down points, alignments, and for setting up to mill my CNC. If you take the time to subscribe to this channel, you'll know when I release those future videos and other instructional videos on the CNC or other projects. My plan at this time is to release videos as I do work in my shop that I think might benefit others. They will not all be CNC related. It's just that I'm doing CNC work at this time, so it's most convenient to make videos on the CNC. If you would like, subscribe, share, and comment, I'd appreciate it. I'm just now building this YouTube channel. I'm not a professional YouTube content creator. I hope to get better. My focus at this time is to provide information that others can use in their journey to explore various topics. I've gathered a lot of good information and appreciate all of the information shared on this YouTube platform and want to pay it forward. Hopefully this will help. Wishing you a wonderful life, a terrific day, and hoping you enjoy what you do, or if not, that you find a way to get to that point in your life. Take care until we meet again.